Hi, welcome to All About Kids. I'm Carol Erdahl, and we're here at the Red Balloon Bookshop today to meet with our new Minnesota Book Awards author, Stephanie Stuve-Bodeen. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
This is just great to have you here. It was such a pleasure when we were at the awards assembly. We knew you were coming, and then here they announced that you had won the award. Have you had other awards too?
Just actually the day before the Minnesota Book Awards, I went to New York and I was presented with the Ezra J. Keats New Writer Award for 1999.
Wow, and now, is this your first book?
It is my first book, yes.
Oh, so 2 awards for your very first book. That must be an unusual experience.
It was amazing, and actually it was part of another award too, the Charlotte Zolotow Award that's given out for picture book text. They have a winner, and then they have 2 other titles, and then they have 5 highly commended titles, and Elizabeth Dahl is one of the highly commended titles.
Oh my, that's, you know, we hear stories about how hard it is to get a book published and how difficult it is. It must be a real thrill to have it published and then to receive all those accolades.
Very much so. I was just so stunned to even have it published that, you know, that was enough. And then the reviews came out, fabulous reviews, starred reviews from School Library Journal, Publishers Weekly, Pointer from Kirkus, a good one from Hornbook, and so then I thought, well, that was great.
Yes.
And then to get these awards, it's just been amazing.
Well, I must confess, when I first read this, I just fell in love with it. You know, you really have just, in such a simple story, but it's such a touching story. And maybe, how did you get the idea for this story?
Well, I was in the Peace Corps in Tanzania, and sort of our final test we had to spend a week with a family, a Tanzanian family, and so I lived in a mud hut with the family, and it was hard at times. There were rats under the bed, and it was very, as Americans, we have so many things and they really have nothing. And so it was kind of a hard week for me. And so when I came back about 5 years later, I had 2 little girls of my own and was kind of thinking about writing stories, because I was just a stay-at-home mom. I had been a teacher, but now I stay at home, and just kind of started writing some stories. And the first one that I wrote was about a little boy in the family. And so then I wrote that and got rejected by a lot of people, and then we went out to dinner with friends of ours who had been in Tanzania. And my friend Bobby, we were talking about our village stays, and she said, well, on my village stay there was a little girl who had a rock for a doll. And it really stuck in my head, and I remembered seeing the kids, you know, the little girls carrying little rocks for dolls because they didn't have toys. And that morning I woke up about 2 in the morning, went upstairs and jotted down the first version of it. And that was that. And it was my 30th birthday. So I don't know if that was a little providence or what.
Oh, well, it's wonderful. My husband and I spent a few weeks in Tanzania ourselves, and I think that's why I resonated to this story, because we visited in those homes where they used those 3 rocks that they would cook on. And at that point in the story where Elizabeth's doll is missing, and she finds that it's part of the.
Yes.
I thought that was so heart-wrenching. How you managed to have her be rescued from there.
Yes.
That was really, really something. But I think one thing we were impressed when we were there too, and you probably saw this too, how the children would make their toys. This whole idea of making their own toys.
Yes.
That
they're very ingenious.
Yeah.
Like one thing that I really liked that I saw, they have very big bugs there, as you probably saw, very large winged creatures, and they would catch one and tie a string to it and then let it go. And so it was like their own little airplane toy. They'd run around and the bug would fly. And
interesting.
And the soccer balls too. They would, you know, get plastic and tape and string and just tie it all up together and play for hours.
Sure. Will you be doing another book with some of those things in it?
Actually, there's the sequel to Elizabeth Dahl is coming out next spring. It's called Mama Elizabeth.
Oh.
Yes, and also Elizabeth Dahl will be out next spring in Spanish. And Weston Woods has just signed a deal to make the video of Elizabeth Dahl.
Oh my,
which
that's
I'm very excited
wonderful.
about.
we should probably open this up and show people some of the lovely illustrations that go with your great text. Do you have a favorite picture in here at all?
I really like near the end. And this is kind of interesting because usually the illustrator and the author have no contact.
Yeah.
And for this one, they really didn't know what contemporary Tanzania looked like. And so they used a lot of my photographs.
Oh.
I really like this one.
Oh,
At
yes.
nighttime, I just love the stars and
Sure. And it's lovely to see her mother with the new baby, and then she's cradling the rock as her baby. That's
And I had a signing actually in Manhattan with the illustrator and got to meet her for the first time, and she's just wonderful. And so she was kind of already interviewing me for the next book, like saying, well, would they have the same clothes and things like that. So she's just wonderful to work with. Marvelous.
And she really did capture that whole thing, because I think, as you mentioned, it's very different living in those huts and what that would look like, and without romanticizing that.
Exactly.
And I think that's what I thought as I looked at the pictures, that it, while it gave the beauty of Africa, you still had the very simplicity of their life there.
Yes.
And it's, in this time when we're thinking of multicultural or diverse cultures, it's really good to have a story that has a real theme and story and is not just done to be multicultural in that sense.
Right, and it's kind of funny because, well, it's very universal in its theme, and when the editor first told me they wanted the story, she said, well, it has she said it's the freshest approach we've seen for a new sibling, bringing a new sibling into the home. And I was like, I hadn't even thought of that. And so I was like, oh, you caught that. Yeah. No, I hadn't even thought of that.
That's interesting, because that's one of the areas that we get requests for so often, is there's going to be a new baby, or the baby has arrived, and do you have a book about a big brother or a big sister? And this is really does that with a really fine story. I mean, so often there are, we have said, there are these books that are so descriptive and so narrative without any real action or any movement. And here, that whole empathy that you have for Elizabeth when the doll is gone, and then the whole episode with pulling her from the fire. I mean, there is that kind of action that does involve you as a reader.
Yeah, and it's funny because one of the reviews mentioned how they liked how I kind of followed through and really saw the rock as a person. Like how she hadn't been hurt, and which I don't know. One of them called me quirky too. But.
Well, I suppose the idea for Americans of having a rock as a doll, is something new. But I said it reminded me in a way when everybody was carrying around those pet rocks years ago. That was kind of.
And the illustrator had a rock that she drug around. She said when she was a little kid she would drag it around. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. And then there's that classic story of Bird Baylor's about everybody needs a rock. And thinking of that as a rock in terms of more personal, emotional kind of steadiness and whatever. Right. And that's, in a sense, is here too. But I mean, it's certainly not, built in like that.
Yes.
Well, that's really, now, you said you had been in Tanzania as a Peace Corps volunteer, but what prepared you before going there in terms of writing? I mean, did you study writing in college, or were you?
I was a journalism major for a while, and I was an English major for a while. I changed majors a lot, but I did take a lot of writing classes and had always liked writing, and my writing had been other forms. I used to write a lot of letters, very long, detailed letters, and now I don't write letters anymore. So, which is kind of sad too. But my writing is coming out in different ways now. But I always wanted to be an author. Like when you're a child, and they say, "Well, what do you want to be?" And kids say movie stars or rock stars, and I was like, I wanted to be an author. So,
did you write when you were a child? Then did you start?
I did. Yeah, and in fact, I got my first award for creative writing when I was in 5th grade.
Oh, my.
So I did always like to write stories.
So, and your family, I imagine, supported you in all of that.
Yes, they were. I grew up on a farm in a really small town, but my parents both read. I mean, our house was full of books. We were really readers, which I think is really the best preparation to be a writer. I don't think you can be a writer without being a reader.
Yeah,
So.
that's interesting, because I think so often people think that ideas just, pop at you. And I suppose in a sense this one did, but you have to have a wide experience and maybe wide reading to...
I think so. I think maybe you take a little teeny bit away from every book you read, and that's in your writing. I think that with all the books that I've read, that perhaps I've taken a little bit from all of them, and they've made me perhaps what I am.
Right, I'm sure. Do you go back now and read any of those things, those letters? Have people kept them for you? I mean, do you go back to them for ideas or for memories, or?
Well, especially the Tanzania ones, I do like to go back over them, and I've had cousins and friends and things send me all the letters that I sent them when I was there, which is helpful. I have written actually a middle reader about a Tanzanian boy, and so that was helpful for that.
Yeah. Then, so it isn't necessarily just something that happens, as you mentioned, you thought of that story, and yet it takes a little bit of a spark that gets you going on something.
Definitely. I always do that. It's almost like I think of the title first, because I had a picture book that I wrote not too long ago, and all I had was the title. And I didn't even know where I was going to go with it. And then it just built, and I think of stories a lot in my head before I write, especially with my little kids. My children come first. I can't just say, okay, I'm going to sit down and write now. It depends on what they're doing. And so a lot of times I have the story in my head, and I walk around with it for a few weeks before anything even goes down on paper. And a lot of times it is just the title or maybe one line from it, especially from my other book. I just had that hook. I didn't even have the rest of it. And then...
Right, we should talk about that other book. It's called We'll Paint the Octopus Red. That's an interesting title. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that came from, we have an arts festival in Fergus Falls, and one of the things they have is a tent where kids can go and make things. And they have a thing called the fish prints, where they have a big dead trout and a dead octopus, and you spread it out and you put the paint on the octopus, then put the paper on and pull it off, and you have an octopus print. It's called the fish print. And that's where the title comes from. That actually, when I first wrote the story, that was part of it. And they thought, Woodbine House rejected the story and said, well, we all thought the idea of painting a dead octopus was rather weird. Instead, then I ended up rewriting the story and just made the octopus rubber. And then they ended up taking the story. So that's where that title came from.
I think we should know a little bit more. Now, this is, again, a child with a new baby coming into the family. Both of these deal with a single child with another sibling arriving. But perhaps you could tell us a little bit. This has a different perspective.
Yes. The little girl in the story, Emma, is talking to her father about all the things she can do with her new baby brother or sister. And then when the baby is born, her brother has Down syndrome. And so then she says, oh, I'm not going to be able to do all those things. But then they realize that, yes, she still will be able to do all those things.
Now, do you have a Down syndrome child in your family, or is this, how did you get into Down syndrome?
I worked at the YMCA in Fergus Falls, and we had a couple of families who had kids with Down syndrome about the age of my kids, and just kind of came up with a story. I saw how this little girl, her older brothers acted toward her just like any other kid. And children really have no preconceived notions about kids at all. They're just other kids, and so I really wanted to bring that positive feeling through. And it's kind of interesting because both my editor and publisher for this book have children with Down syndrome. And so there's a question and answer section in the back, and the questions are actually from their own families and friends, questions that the older siblings asked about the new baby.
Yeah, I thought as I read that was really a great contribution to the book, to have that kind of thing, because I think parents often don't intuitively know what to tell children.
Right.
And I think they oftentimes, I'm sure you've had it with your children and we've had it with ours, where you give them much more information than they really can absorb or that they want. And at the same time, you know, knowing just how to proceed with that.
Yes. And it's gotten such great response from people. And I believe there are a few hospitals that have kind of bought it in bulk to give to new parents who have kids with Down syndrome, and it's become really a helpful
That's really a fine
resource.
Idea. That, and I think it must give the parents some hope too, because I'm sure the experience is a difficult one, and this gives them the hope and the looking forward to know that
they still can do all that stuff.
Yeah, well, that's really fine. We just are sitting here in the bookshop here, and I'm wondering, has your publisher been sending you to other places? We're thrilled to have you here at the Red Balloon, and it was really fun when I read the jacket on the book to know that you were from Fergus Falls, so that we're pleased. But do they have plans for sending you in other places so that
I think
around
it
the country?
sounds like I'm going to start doing some things. And I've also, like I did Spotlight on Books in Bemidji in April, which was wonderful. That was with John Hassler and William Durbin. And I did a young writers conference in Fergus Falls with John Coy and Phyllis Root. And that was really fun, and several others. And I've been doing a lot of school visits.
You know, I was going to ask you about that, because we get requests. People call here when they see our newsletter and they say, oh, can you help us get that author to our school? Now tell me, how do you feel about that, and how much time do you give to it, or how open are you to that kind of activity?
Oh, I think I'm very open to it. It's very tiring. It's very tiring to, you would think you'd just go and you'd read your books and you'd talk about your books, but it's very tiring. Actually, I will be going to, the end of May, I'll be in Braham, Minnesota, because actually my sister-in-law teaches elementary school there, so I'm going to their school. But I've been to a lot of schools, and we're moving to Iowa, and so I hope to do some more of that there.
Now, do you go and spend like a day in the schools with different classes? Is there a particular age group that you prefer to be
I
with?
typically go to school and spend the whole day. I find that the really young kids, like kindergarten and first grade, they're about good for me to read the stories, and that's just about it. And then they start telling me about their dog or something.
Yes, right.
Yes. And then I find like the third and fourth grade age is really good, because they've pretty much started to write their own stories, and they're very interested. And fifth and sixth, they're usually pretty interested. When I get older than that, I really prefer to have kids who just sign up for it, because a lot of times you get, the older kids who could really care less. And I'd prefer to have kids who are interested in it and will take something away from it, rather than feeling like they have to sit there and listen to me talk. So, and I've just begun to really specify, what size groups and stuff I'll talk to and things like that.
Have the children, when you've introduced Elizabeth Erdahl, what kind of questions do they ask, or what kind of response do you
Well,
get?
I had a kindergartner tell me not too long ago, she raised her hand and said, that rock wasn't really a doll. So, things like that. And then you explain, well, they don't have Barbies over there, and, they have to create their own toys. So
one hopes that maybe by sharing that kind of experience, maybe some children here will become a bit more creative.
Yes. Yes.
in
I
what
think
they do.
kids today have so much done for them, like they watch television or they play computer, and they don't really have to create anything or imagine anything, because it's all there for them.
Oh, yes.
And so I think that's really important, because our society is really headed towards a technological society, and I just hope that we don't lose the imagination and creativity and stuff that made this century what it was,
Right.
as well as the next century.
Well, and of course, I think as an author and creator of books, and as we are, as booksellers selling these books, I think our common belief in the fact that we need to keep that creative human side of growth and development is so important.
Absolutely.
I think that I remember as a child, kind of losing myself in a book, and I think that's the goal, in a sense, is when we see children come here and sit and they'll be reading a book and their parents will be calling them and they're lost in the book that they're
Yes.
reading. And I think that's a wonderful,
Yes.
wonderful trait. And it's,
And I think things have changed too. When I grew up, if I wanted, that's how I learned about other parts of the world, was through books. But now I think so many people, you know, kids get to go and see those places. It's not that big of a deal to fly and go to Japan or wherever. And so maybe there's also that part of it, that that you know, we had to rely on books to see the rest of the world, where a lot of kids, especially in America, are getting a chance to travel and they see the places instead of just having to read about them. So there's all kinds of different elements there.
but I think in a book like Elizabethy's Doll, though, even if they were to visit Africa or to visit someplace, you give the understanding from the child's perspective. And I think that's something that authors can help children with, is that understanding and respect for others. That while she's in a whole different culture far away, even if they were to go as tourists, they would not get that experience.
No, they wouldn't at all.
And I think that's important for us to realize, that reading is important, and sharing and understanding.
Yes.
That kind of thing. When you do your school visits, do you encourage children to keep journals, or do you encourage them to write letters? Or
I tell them whatever way they can write. If it's stories, and a lot of times we'll do, like with the older kids, we'll do a little writing exercise or something. And just to get them thinking. I always recommend letters, because people really like to get letters. And if you send them to your grandma or something, she'll keep them anyway. And then some days send the whole pile back.
Sure.
And, because a lot of times I think if it's something you write, and then 10 years down the line you look and you tend to maybe toss it or something. I never did. But I think people just think, oh, that's just something I wrote, and they throw it away. Where I think those things, there's such a window to a part of you that you've forgotten. Like I recently found a big folder of stuff I'd written when I was like a sophomore in college, including this journal I had to keep for this class, and it's just interesting to read and see what kind of a person I was. I find it fascinating.
I think that idea of the letters, that's something that would, in a sense, well, some children, to sit down and just write in a journal or a diary type thing, that might be, they get started and then they lose interest often. But if they were to be writing letters, that's a wonderful way for them to have a purpose, in a sense, for their writing, not just the purpose of recording feelings and thoughts and activities, but to share that with someone else. That's
especially nowadays when grandmas and grandpas usually aren't in the same town.
Right.
It's a way to really have the kids show what their own life is like.
Right, or even if they do it on email, they could have, hopefully grandma or grandpa or somebody will print it out so they could save it. That's interesting to think of that too, because I think it is true. I've read some letters that our children had written to my mother, and at this point they're all adults, and I think, well, that evidently gave me an insight into what was important at that particular time, and I might not have realized how important that was.
Yes. And it's fun to get, like, my grandmother recently died, and they've been going through her house and getting rid of some papers and stuff. And my mom sent me a note that I had written to my grandma about, can I come and stay overnight this Friday night and all this. And it was really sweet to get that in my little childish handwriting.
Sure. And as we talk about this, I think so many of us are at that stage where we're trying to clear out all of the stuff that we've accumulated. But it would be a reminder to us not to clear out those kinds of things, that we should keep letters, that even if at this time we don't see anything more than just preserving them, there will be maybe people in our family who would use them for perhaps being an author themselves.
Well, my first project that I worked on that I have not given up on yet was when my grandfather went and worked on the building of the Alaskan Highway in the 40s, and he sent letters like every day, and my grandmother saved them all, and they are so fascinating. I didn't know who I get my writing from, but boy, my grandfather's got some great letters there, and so that's one project I want to work on.
That would be great. Well, Stephanie, this has been just a pleasure to have you here, and we look forward to the next book. Do you have a title for that next one?
Mama Elizabethy.
Mama Elizabethy. Well, we'll look forward to that. And we thank our viewers for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing that book.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.